So we've been talking a lot in this series on idolatry about the dark spiritual realm and how these dark spirits interact with physical conduits and how people are trying to interact with these dark spirits through physical conduits and either worship them or manipulate them into doing what they want. But we wanted to pause while we have Dr. Ganchow here, who's a double doctorate, one in neuroscience and one in counseling systems, and kind of bridge a related idea into what we're talking about. So we're not talking about something today that is specifically idolatry, but we want to talk about something that is related to it. And it is a way that Western culture has over time begun to interact with spiritual beings. Now, again, this isn't idolatry, but it is very similar because it's a way that we are purposefully putting ourselves into a mindset where we can interact with spiritual beings. Now, we know those beings to be dark spiritual beings. Again, if you're out there practicing this, you may go, no, that being is my friend, or that being is keeping my house clean, or whatever. It's not. I promise you that it's not. It is a dark, evil spiritual being.
Yes.
So we're going to bridge the gap between idolatry and psychedelics, or idolatry and maybe even a little bit of psychotropics. And we're going to talk about how that has become a problem in our Western culture and the dangers of using those things either willingly or using them passively to engage in the dark spiritual realm. And to do that, Grant, we're going to talk about, I'm just going to throw it out there, shamanism. Y'all are so afraid to use that word.
Yeah.
Shamanism, right? We're doing that.
To snatch the bandit off.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about shamanism. And so we're going to look at this.
How it affects psychedelics and the modern idea of psychotropic.
And so we're going to talk about Terence McKenna and Graham Hancock and sort of the cultural phenomena that we saw in the 70s and how they understood what these psychedelics were meant for. Then we're going to look at the concept of pharmakeia in scripture and its connection to this conversation of shamanism and idolatry. And then we're going to see that in some classic examples in foreign pagan mythology. That's the worldview we need to have in mind when we start talking about what these substances are being used for in modern psychiatric practice.
Okay.
Is that fair?
It is. And I'm going to say, since we're in the intro too, it's important for us to say what we are not doing is making an assessment of modern practice when it comes to therapy and counseling.
That's good.
What we are talking about is the history of pharmakeia. We're going to talk about theology. We're going to talk a little bit about accepted factual things that have happened throughout history. And we're not going to make any diagnostic assessments. We're not going to talk about mental illness or mental health in that category.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about this in a way, this is what happened throughout history. And this is what we need to think as we think through the realm of veiled kingdoms about this subject and how it applies to today.
All right, so Dr. Stephen Ganchow, Grant Forrester, and I are going to talk today about pharmacology, theology, and history. I'm Kevin Laymon. This is Veiled Kingdoms. It's time to pierce the veil.
So the first portion of today's conversation is going to be theology. We're going to look at a bit of history, and then we're going to let Dr. Ganchow walk us through some stuff on pharmacology, because that's not what we know. So we'll talk about the unhinged stuff, and then we'll learn a little bit about how maybe pharmacology can be a little bit unhinged too. Is that fair?
Yeah.
At least from a historical perspective, because much like as we explore what the Bible says about what's actually happening in the spiritual realm, we need to look at history and see where the spiritual realm has led us historically, and how it is that even today, secular sciences, we refer back to things that are very spiritual in nature. On this subject.
Yeah.
Right.
So we'll jump in. So we'll let the psychedelists. I actually don't know what their name would be. I should have looked it up. It was something like psychonauts, something like that.
Psychonauts?
People, I can't remember what the word was. It's guys who use psychedelics to go on spiritual quests.
Okay.
Like that's a thing people do now.
Aaron Rodgers.
Terence McKenna.
Hey, leave Aaron Rodgers out of this.
Yeah, dude, he is all over the DMT. So Terence McKenna is one of the church fathers of psychedelics. And is that blasphemous to say? Call him a church father of psychedelics?
I mean,
We're
a
towing
church
the line.
father? Why can't he just be why can't he just be the father of
Church
psychedelics?
father, that's fine. All right.
Why does he have to be a church father of
All right,
psychedelics?
fine. So Terence
Church
McKenna.
of the Psychedelics?
Would you let me go?
So, go.
Okay. So Terence McKenna is a great example of someone who sort of was a foundational figure in the 70s for the culture surrounding psychedelics. And so he wrote a handful of books. One of them was called Food of the Gods: The Search for the Original Tree of Knowledge, a Radical History of Plants, Drugs, and Human Evolution. He believed that, along with modern thinkers like guys like Graham Hancock, he believed there were certain substances, not all psychedelic substances, but there were certain substances that would sort of connect us to the spiritual world and allow us to literally communicate with entities that were, in his words, desperate to communicate with mankind.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's wild. And so Christians will hear that and go, it's just something. And he's like, why are the Christians who believe in the spiritual world denying that the spiritual world is engaging with us?
That still perplexes me.
I know.
Why do people have such a hard time saying that demons exist?
And because the enemy has changed plans.
That's exactly right.
He's changed tactics with us.
Exactly right. And so Terence McKenna like even curses in his book. I got to put a curse word in an academic paper because he is cursing at the idea that Christians think that this is ridiculous. He says they're desperate to talk to us. And so keep that in mind. What we're going to say is not just this wild veiled kingdom's theological position. Terence McKenna, a non-Christian who died a non-Christian, was saying when he was alive that this is a very true and spiritual reality, that these substances connect us to the spiritual world and that these beings want to talk to us and sort of push us forward in our next stage of evolution. So the connection here between what Terence McKenna is talking about and the word that you might be learning for the first time today, pharmakeia, and idolatry, is that those three things are actually connected in Scripture. And we're only going to look at a couple examples here. The word pharmakeia in the Greek, so in the New Testament, Paul translates that word as sorcery. And then in the Old Testament, when they translated it to Greek, the Septuagint, that same word is used to describe things like sorcery and witchcraft and mediumship and divination and those kinds of things. Pharmakeia, which obviously sounds like pharmacies, pharmaceutical, pharmacology, had a deep connection. Pharmakeia had a deep connection with spiritual practice, sorcery, witchcraft. Scholars translate the various conjugations of pharmakeia as one of the following. This is actually from a great book. It's Louis Unget's Return of the Dragon. And he says, scholars translate the various conjugations of pharmakeia as one of the following: witch, wizard, witchcraft, sorcerer, sorcery, divination. Yes, the word for witchcraft and the word for drugs are the same in the language of the Bible. The Freeburg Lexicon defines pharmakeia as, quote, one who prepares and uses drugs for magical purposes or ritual witchcraft, sorcerer, sorcery, a poisoner, or a magician, end quote. The Lunita lexicon defines it as, quote, the use of drugs for any kind for magical effect or sorcery or magic, end quote.
So this is obviously a thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul mentions it explicitly, and is that what Galatians 5:20 is?
Yeah, it's Galatians 5:20.
The word of the works of the flesh?
Sorcery and the works of the flesh in that list, yeah. I mean, we don't have to go into it, but yeah, it's definitely there. That's where Paul uses it, and then it shows up, a version of the word shows up twice in Revelation as well, both times translated sorcery or sorceress or something like that. But yeah, it's always translated that way, even in the New Testament.
Yeah, and so if you're thinking you're reading the works of the flesh in Galatians 5, and you're like, greed, yep, I do that. And you're like, lust, yep, I do that. Sorcery.
That can't be. We don't talk about spiritual
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
No. It's all inside of me.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Which I think sorcery comes right after idolatry in the list as well.
Man.
So like,
yeah, they're connected. And so suffice to say they're connected. So what I want to do is I want to jump to a story of Manasseh. So Manasseh was a wild child. And so Manasseh is an example of an incredibly wicked Old Testament Israelite king. 2 Chronicles 33:6, it says, he, that is Manasseh, even made his sons pass through the fire in the valley of Ben-Hinnom. We did a whole bit on Ben-Hinnom. Well, we did a little bit on Ben-Hinnom and idolatry and Gehenna and Molech. That's what that means. He was sacrificing his children to Molech, on the idol of Molech, in the valley of Ben-Hinnom. And he practiced soothsaying, interpreted omens, practiced sorcery, that's pharmakeia, and dealt with the mediums and spiritists. He did much that was evil in the sight of Yahweh, provoking him to anger. And so Manasseh is getting high on some substance and sacrificing his children on a burnt altar that is also an idol to Molech. The Bible sees these things as connected, which means we should see these things as connected.
We should also see them for what they are and be repulsed by it.
Yeah.
The idea that he was altering his state of mind, there's a whole thing here that's worth space and time in future content, but there's an entire idea there that should be utterly repulsive to us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is that idea in like 2 sentences?
We don't have. I can't even do it. I can't even do it in 2 sentences. No,
Okay.
I wouldn't be
All right.
able to do it. It's too much.
Okay. When we hit 10,000 subscribers, Stephen
I'm coming
Ganchow's
back.
coming back.
For a
And
30-second
yes,
episode where
yes,
he does this
yes,
in 30
yeah,
seconds.
Yeah.
So some of the examples of how we see these concepts connected in foreign religious systems. And so we're going to look at some of them. These are just really popular ones. For those of us today who are listening to like the Joe Rogan Experience, he's like, but have you tried DMT, right? That's where this is going to be that cultural connection. So we're going to look at 3 Central and South American deities and 4 substances that they were using to engage with these beings. And so the first one is, you want to read that word?
Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I hear Graham Hancock call it Quetzalcoatl.
Okay, I was pretty close.
Yeah,
then.
I'm sure
Especially
in
given
Spanish.
that you gave me no warning that you were going to ask me to read that word.
I love doing that. So
pretty good.
I'm sure in Spanish that's not how it sounds, but
it's a Spanish word?
oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, technically not. It's whatever the native language was of those people before the Spaniards conquered them. The substance that they were using is mescaline, which is peyote, or psilocybin, which is also another form of mushroom. I think. Is that correct? Psilocybin, a mushroom? Are you from off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head.
I can't remember.
You don't know every single drug and substance and what it does and its effects?
I should
Not
have
off
put
the
that
top
in
of
the
my
notes
head.
when I was getting
Golly.
another paper. But
All right.
so Kukulkan is another example of one of these deities. They also were using psilocybin to engage with Kukulkan. And then ayahuasca, which is also the deity and the name of the plant that they're using, or they call the substance ayahuasca. Now, here's really interesting, not in the notes. All 3 of these deities are serpent deities.
Really?
They're all winged serpents.
That
Yeah.
is fascinating.
Yeah, all 3 of them are winged serpents.
Wow.
And so all of these
Okay.
are connected to psychedelics. And even more than that, all of these beings told their shamans to use human sacrifice
Wow.
in connection. So serpent god, shamans using these substances, human sacrifice.
Yeah. If you
Right.
don't know why we're going, that's crazy, go listen to our episode on the Chaos Dragon and you'll understand.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, actually.
Yeah. And so each of these cultures had a particular individual that was sort of at the head of the spiritual pack. He would have been the one. So like in Celtic, also off the notes, in Celtic religions, it was sort of like lay people would use them. And they had liberty caps, which is a mushroom that everybody could use. And then they had something that they called the red food, which was a different mushroom, which his name is, I'm forgetting it. That's why I get for not being on my notes. And that was only reserved for the shamans because it had a much more potent experience. Each of these cultures would have a shaman of some sorts, a witch doctor perhaps, and they would be the ones who are the go-between, the prophet, the priest, between the deity that they're working with and then the people themselves. They would use these substances to enter into liminal space, sort of softening the veil, so to speak, and they would interact with these beings that are on the other side, right, the spiritual world. All of this is to say that psychedelics have a connection to idolatry historically, and therefore they have a connection to the demonic. And so you certainly don't want to open yourself up to that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think that's part of what I am hoping as we continue to have these discussions. Part of what I'm hoping to bring to the table is how we can take everything that we're talking about and make it relevant, like really relevant to right now, because there are some things that we're addressing right now that are very relevant to us.
Yeah, right.
Especially when we flip the script a little bit and start to think about, maybe let's look at it from a Western mindset, okay? So instead of thinking theologically or historically, let's think about it from the perspective of modern psychiatry and modern psychology.
Okay.
You've got Dr. Alan Francis. Dr. Alan Francis was the chairperson of the DSM-4. For those of you unfamiliar with the world of mental health, the DSM is the big book on mental illness. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Currently, we're on the DSM-5 TR, which is a revision. But Alan Francis, he wrote the DSM-4.
You wrote the whole thing?
Well, he was the chairperson for it. He was the chairperson for it and oversaw the creation of it, which is a thing in and of itself. He wrote a book called Saving Normal. Saving Normal is a fascinating book. If you're interested just in anything that we're talking about from a psychiatric perspective, what he does is he traces history to modernity. And one of the things he talks about is shamanism. In great length. So shamanism is the older, it's maybe the great grandparent to what we would now understand to be modern psychiatry.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And he talks about how
there's a link there.
Oh, there's a distinct link throughout history.
Yeah.
And so here's the connection point for especially those of us in the West. It's a distinct connection point between what we understood of the past to present day. Shamanism is very much alive and well if you look at it through a rationalist mindset. So some of the things that he talks about, and I want to say, again, this is a gross understatement. This is a gross understatement of all the things that Francis talks about. But ultimately what he says, he outlines how ancient shamanism and shamanistic practices led to much of modern pharmacology and much of modern psychiatry today. The word shaman, it literally means one who knows. So when you have a distress and you go to a modern psychiatrist, you're expecting them to know. You're expecting them to be able to identify based on symptomology what's happening inside of you. And a psychiatrist in particular, their primary function, though they can provide some therapy, their primary function is to provide a medication that will help you transition from feeling one way or thinking one way to another way. Wow. Which is a fascinating thing in and of itself.
Yeah, really.
Right.
I'm actually going to come back to that in a minute, so don't let me forget. If I wander too far at the end of my thought process, remind me of that thing.
Okay.
But ultimately, what we see, we can trace throughout history that it was accepted practice that ancient shamans of various religious schools of thought, they were the ones to help prescribe changes in thought process, changes in life, and they would use all kinds of substances to do it. The shaman was the prophet, the spiritual medium. They were the judge. They were the scholar of the tribe. These tribes would have looked to them in the same way, in many ways, that we look to the apostles, and they were expected to be the ones who knew. The shaman, by the way, was also the mediary between tribes and their chosen deity.
Oh, wow.
And they would use substances to then connect with their deities of choice. There's all kinds of things that are, they would use herbs, hallucinogenics, and all kinds of things. So today, then, we get a glimpse of this because pharmacology is still used today. Now, hang on. Let me say one thing. What I am not saying is that every mental health medication, every pill, every moment or piece of pharmacology has a demon behind it. I did not say that. That's not what I'm saying, and you can't pin that on me if you're trying. What I am saying is we would be foolish to not look at the historical connection between how we got to where we are.
Right.
And we would be naive to think that suddenly Satan doesn't do things the way he's always done them, and he just has to modernize his game as we go.
Modernize the game.
We're not saying mental health medication is bad, but we are saying from a historical perspective, we need to recognize there is a charted path that has a very, very spiritual origin that led from where we were historically, from Old Testament to Indian shamans, to our Native American shamans, worldly shamans, to today. And we can chart this from a very spiritual origin to a very materialistic application.
And Francis does that in his book, Saving Normal?
He does this in Saving Normal. And again,
awesome.
It's so important we know that he is a secularist. He's not a believer. And he was the chairperson of the DSM. It's the book that we use today for diagnostics. The world recognizes this in the same way that we do. And we need to, as believers, recognize, okay, there's something here we have to at least think about. I'll stop there because I know you guys want to comment.
It blows my mind that secularists like McKenna, like Francis, are having these kinds of conversations and making blatant connections to spiritualism, and Christians just maybe are unaware, or we sort of bury it because we don't want to know.
We have been deceived.
Yeah, right.
And the enemy doesn't want us to know.
Yeah. It's just, it's wild. And so like the world that we're calling secular, the world that we're calling worldly is much more spiritual in some of its understandings than perhaps we as Christians would give it credit. And we certainly need to wake up to that.
I think it's interesting. There was some research that came out at the very beginning of August 2024, which is a recent date for us, that demonstrates definitively that psychedelics can lead to false beliefs. Psychedelics can lead to false beliefs. I read the whole study. It's really fascinating. It cross-references back to, again, secular, materialistic, Western research from 2021 and on and on and on back. So materialists, they know this.
Yeah.
We as Christians, we can't ignore this.
What are they saying those false beliefs are? Like, are there examples of that? Is it just I'm not a good person, or I'm seeing things in the room?
So they don't go into that kind of detail. But what it is that they're talking about essentially is people search for truth inside. Right. And they are exposing themselves. We know they're exposing themselves to principalities and powers that are very, very real.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What they are believing they're exposing themselves to is this inner sense of enlightenment and other things.
Sure.
But you also have to remember that the person engaging in the study, they're going to have their own sense of presuppositions that they bring to the table. Whatever it is that they believe about life is going to be the truth, the false belief that they have revealed to them or expanded upon. We know, though, that these are demons.
Yeah.
These are things that we should not be toying with.
Yeah. And I think that I was listening to an interview. I think he did it on Rogan, but I can't remember. Aaron Rodgers, quarterback of the Green Bay Packers.
Who is otherwise
a
a saint, I might add.
Yes.
Also a sorcerer.
Former quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. Also a sorcerer. Also now the quarterback for the New York Jets. But
I didn't know that. Congratulations, Aaron Rodgers.
Well, he tried to last year and tore his ACL about 3 minutes, or tore his Achilles tendon about 3 minutes into the first game.
He carried the flag, ran out, played 3 plays, and got hurt.
Yes. It was terrible.
But he's still a great man.
Yes, he's still
and
a great man.
And we get off Aaron Rodgers' lawn.
But But I just use him because he's a prominent figure. You know, a lot of people may know who he is.
Yeah.
He would talk about how he went, I can't remember what he used. The ayahuasca stuff
ayahuasca.
Familiar to some of the stuff that he was using, but he would.
I was going to say ayahuasca is the substance. So, and I wasn't clear in my language here. I used all of the compounds that are in them. So they're mescaline, psilocybin, and technically it should be DMT.
I see. Yeah.
But I just called it ayahuasca, which is the name of the substance.
Yeah, and it could be called either one. I think I've heard it both, used there. But the point is, he would tell you that, he opened this, it kind of opened up this whole like portal to a demonic realm where now he, sees a being called the Hat Man, and that's a whole other thing. And there's guys who know a whole lot more about that stuff than we do anyway, but it is a deity, a demon, perhaps, that is showing up in the dreams of a lot of people who interact with these things. But here's the crazy thing, and this is the warning that I want to give, and then I'll let you guys nerd out about your pharmacology stuff all you want. The warning is, though, that whatever interview I was listening to, and I really think it was Rogan, Aaron was talking about how he has now opened up a portal that he can't close.
Ooh, yep.
Like he has let this thing in, and now even when he's not doing the drugs, this thing is showing up. The Hat Man is showing up, and he tells the story of after one of the football games or after a practice, he was sitting in the locker room and he was by himself, and he said that while he was sitting in the thing, that the locker room, and it's this very long hallway basically. And at the end of the locker room from where he's sitting, the lights just start shutting off, coming all the way at him, coming all the way at him, coming all the way at him. And then at the end of the thing sits the Hat Man. At the end of the locker room sits the Hat Man. And he hadn't taken anything. I mean, we're talking about one of the best professional athletes to ever be known. He said he ran out of the locker room like a scared child.
Oh, man.
And to this day now, he cannot be in a NFL or in a football locker room by himself.
Supernatural
because he's so terrified of what might happen.
It makes you wonder if he's ever by himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
there you go. That's
a good point.
That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's all kinds of things, permissions and covenants and all kinds of things that we can't get into here. But it sounds like Aaron Rodgers has given something permission.
Yeah.
So
how would we say that these? So this is off the notes a little bit, but how would we say that these things are opening up the realm? Like what about these substances gives the demonic realm, the fallen Elohim realm, more access to our minds?
Why don't I tell you what the study says?
Please.
So this study, just for those of you that might want to know and go take a look, it was in Communication Psychology, and its publication date was August 1st. The title of the paper is An Integrated Theory of False Insights and Beliefs Under Psychedelics. There is no paywall. You can go and read this, and you'll see. You can download the PDF, and you can cross-reference all of the other research that they allude to. And if you want to do that research, there it is for you. What they say, essentially, and I'm going to quote Dr. Nicholas oh boy, I'm going to butcher your last name, Dr. Nicholas. I am so sorry. Fabiano. Okay? He says, psychedelics can provide a genesis for false beliefs by inducing belief relaxation, including those that are true, and increase precision weighting of novel, dopaminergically modulated insight. So it's a dopamine.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Essentially, your brain is overrun with dopamine. In some instances, fact-free learning may therefore be occurring primarily with respect to erroneous or embellished sensory data. I could talk about the four senses, the four internal senses. We can go all over the place here. Hang on. And the insights may then play a recursive role of preferencing and entrenching ideas consistent with new beliefs. I'm going to stop there because otherwise it's going to be too much.
His take is that what is opening up is a dopamine overload.
That's part of what he says is happening as you are exposing yourself.
So what do we do with things like video games or pornography or other things that are causing a would it have the potential of having the same effect as what these things are doing?
In theory, yes. If we're going to say that this study says that, then in theory, yes. But we're talking here about something very specific.
I understand. It just kind of got me thinking because there are a lot of things. I mean, Instagram, social media, whatever. There are a lot of things in our culture that offer a dopamine overload.
Let's talk about this device.
Curious.
This device, they have designed it so that it does deep color stimulation of your brain. They've designed it so that it makes you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Which is why they bury the grayscale feature, by the way, in like 5 settings deep.
Yeah.
Because they don't want you to look away. They want your attention all the time.
Right?
I do. Yes. And part of my role now requires me to look at things that I have to change it back and forth.
Yeah.
So for the record, it goes bang, bang, bang. And it goes, 2, 3. Black and white. I did it. Because I change it back and forth, but it's not black and white nowadays. But yes, to say that video games and other dopamine stimulating things could have a similar effect. Yeah, I mean, because think about it. They all induce a euphoric effect on us.
Right.
This would be euphoria on overdrive.
There are monks in other religions and systems of belief that can enter into these same, I don't have the doctor behind me, but they will enter into what I would refer to just as liminal space, this idea of like sort of thinning the veil. And there are Buddhist monks who can meditate to a point where they experience a lot of the same phenomena.
Wow.
And they are communing with spirits or things of the nature without having used substances.
Right.
You can sort of get high on the body's supply, so to speak, by certain breathing exercises and all kinds of things and certain temperature exposures and all kinds of things to sort of mimic what is happening by just eating peyote.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the real danger in talking about the psychedelics specifically in this episode would be that a lot of these other things like monks, video games, whatever it is, that's something you're kind of choosing to engage in, and then you're continuing that process while you're in it. What we're talking about is substances that you can take that once they are ingested into your system, you have very little control over what happens next.
Right.
And I would say that's what makes them precisely even more dangerous than just anything that would potentially overload our dopamine. You know, if I'm looking at whatever, any social media platform, and I feel like my brain is becoming overloaded with dopamine, or if I'm playing a video game, I can always just stop that. And then the dopamine overload stops. Once you ingest these substances, you have no control over what happens next.
You're on a quest.
You're on a
now.
journey. You're on a quest. Yeah. I mean, and not a little yellow exclamation point. It's a real quest. And so is there anything you guys want to add before we close up? You had talked about wanting to come back to the psychiatrist and their diagnosis.
Yeah, I think we'll stop that for now because it'll be another 5 or 6 minutes of thinking out loud that we'll want to talk about a lot.
Okay. Well, maybe we do another episode again very soon. So there's a lot to say here. And I think, Dr. Ganchel just kind of brought that out. There's a lot to say here, especially while we have his expertise in town. We only have him here for a few days. And so we're trying to cram in as much content as we can with him while he's here.
Yeah.
But there's a lot here that we could explore in different series that, we certainly plan to do in the future. It's impossible to sum up, a practicum for using psychotropics in this episode. So there's psychedelics, which are kind of the drugs and those type things that
mescaline, psilocybin, DMT.
That Grant was talking about before. But there's also psychotropics, which have or can have a similar effect, which would just be your name some.
Maybe no, I don't want to do that. But let me say this. I want to make sure that I'm very, very clear about some things. If you are taking a mental health medication, this is not the space where you should hear from us that you should stop doing that.
Right.
If you are seeing a doctor, you should continue to see your doctor. If you are taking medication, you should continue to take medication.
Yeah, very
And
true.
if you have some concern, if your conscience now is thinking, boy, I might want to explore this a little bit, you need to see a qualified professional, someone trained in the art of psychiatry that can then help you. If you want to make some changes, see someone who is qualified in your world within the realm of your insurance to ensure that you get the help that you desire.
Yes. Not just a general practitioner.
Not a general practitioner. You want to see someone who's an expert and they can help you make informed decisions.
All right. Yeah. So thank you for that clarification. That's actually a very important clarification.
Yes.
To be fair, I was headed there.
Yeah.
I was kind of just trying to give an example of what because some people may hear psychotropic and they're like, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of trying to give an example of like something you've seen an ad you've seen on TV or
is something like Zoloft
or Adderall or
Cymbalta.
Yeah.
Cymbalta. But
I understand the caution there because we don't want anybody to hear that and go, well, I take Adderall. Am I opening myself up to demons?
Oh.
Not necessarily.
No. Yeah.
But it's just something that you should be cautious about. That's all we're saying. And if you have questions on it, consult a medical professional who knows what they're talking about, who walks in these circles, who's involved in these realms, and not just a general practitioner doctor.
And be informed by history. Dr. Alan Francis is a secularist. He is a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And he wrote on this in books like Saving Normal and in other journal articles. All of this is readily available. We can see from an external, non-Christian perspective that they recognize the same realities that we are. We need to be informed.
Yes, informed. And that's the right word. And I think that at least for now, all we want you to get from this episode is that we want you to see this through not just a historical lens, not just a philosophical lens, not just a psychiatric lens. We want you to see this through a theological lens.
Yeah.
We want you to think theologically about these things and then let your faith be in the front seat of your decision-making and engagement on this very, very, very sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
If you guys don't have anything else to add, we good?
No, I trust the good doctor.
I have another 45 minutes to add, but we're stopping here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then I guess we could all say in unison that that's all we've got for today. If you're still with us, we have to assume this has been helpful to you. If it hasn't been, we're going to keep doing more episodes like this and things like this. So don't feel like this is all you're ever going to get from us on this topic. But if it was helpful to you, please consider giving a like to the video or subscribing to the channel. If you're new here, we have lots of backlog content that you can sift through. There's some really good stuff in there that I think would be helpful to you. Grant, Stephen, this has been an amazing series. We may have one bonus episode coming on this series after this, but this also could be the conclusion. You'll just have to wait and find out. But thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Thank you, everyone who's been listening, and God bless.